Well, I would like to make a few announcements first. First of all, we are going to talk about the 6 entrances. No, we had already completed that on the Surangama Sutra. Tomorrow is Sunday, day after is Monday, we don't have class. In the next few days, we will practice together in the confession liturgy. I hope all of us can practice and complete 400,000 times of the mantra. For those ones who really couldn't finish it within a week, at least you should recite the 400,000 times of the mantra before the end of Sagadawa. We should practice Vajrasattva mantra 400,000. I had already completed tens of thousands. I feel I'm already really excellent. Within this month, this is how I feel. Every single year, I tend to leave a little bit behind. I tend to leave a little bit unfinished. But this year, I intend to complete all of the 400,000 because we don't know how long or how short our lifespan is. It is impermanence. At least if we can finish the 400,000 times this year, all of the negative deeds that we had accumulated before that can be purified. So I hope that we can all prepare for it and we can complete the mantra recitation. Do not use all kinds of excuses by saying that I'm too busy, I am serving the Sangha, I am not healthy enough to do that. I think if we can all exert all of our effort, we can definitely complete the 400,000 times of recitation. On top of that, I really hope that you can truly engage in the visualization and engage in the practice wholeheartedly. If you can even attend one session in this way or one day of the practice in this way, that would be the best. People tend to neglect how fortunate they are and what kinds of favorable conditions they have at the times of having all of those. So I hope to remind you that this is really the best time to do that. In terms of the teachings, I don't think it's necessary to give too much teachings. Everybody engaged in very diligent and very long period of time of study. So in the next few days, let us just simply engage in the practice and recitation. Also, do not wonder about, especially during this special period of time, if you are really suffering from certain illness and need to go to hospitals, then this is the time to go. That's fine, I understand. But this is not the time to travel around to go on pilgrimage tours and so on. It's very inconvenient at this point of time. It is for your own safety, for your own health, for the group's health. It is the best not to travel around now. This year, I have told the authorities that we're not having the Dharma assembly. We are all practicing only on our own to recite the Vajrasattva mantra. Because if we were to make the announcement that we have the Dharma assembly, then various kinds of obstacles may arise, and I don't think that's appropriate. So let us just to stay on our own and then practice the recitation and the confession liturgy. You can practice in a way of engaging in a 7-day retreat, solitary retreat. The Sagadawa marks a few of the significant dates of Shakyamuni Buddha, the day of the Buddha's enlightenment, for example. That is the day that we engage in the practice of Vajrasattva. This month includes the day of enlightenment, the day of parinirvana, the day of birth of the Buddha. Other than the turning of the Dharma wheel, which is one of the four major holidays, or one of the four major festivals to commemorate the Buddha, the rest of the three are included in this auspicious month, that is Sagadawa. So in this month, we should all exert our best effort to recite the Vajrasattva mantra, to engage in diligent practice. This is my reminder to all of you. This is the first thing. And the second is that in general, since we're not having a public Vajrasattva Dharma assembly this time, and we don't have that large flood-in of the tourists and practitioners from outside. However, I'm sure there would be some individuals that would travel from afar, and that is why the management team would have to deal with the various aspects. For example, dealing with people who come from afar and dealing with the various issues that may come from it, especially people from afar and people traveled from elsewhere may carry virus. So to prevent those kinds of issues, I need to make the announcement that I do not have any public audience, and you won't be able to see me. But after a few days, I will slowly give out some Buddha statues that's being consecrated and so on. And I hope that you understand at this point we don't have any of the gatherings or any of the audience. This is the next thing. Another thing.
怎么讲啊？就是说就我们这个金堂啊，就是金堂的话呢，就是以后就是不要增加就是什么其他的，就是包括公平也好、佛像也好，包括什么这个其他这个上师的像啊，
too much of the statues and different kinds of offerings and the pictures and statues of different lamas, because it's already really full, as you can see on the altar. Without consent from me, without agreement from the management team of the year, it is not allowed for people to willingly put different statues and offerings over there.
这样的话呢，就是不太好，就是所以从现在开始，如果你们有什么造像啊、杂佛塔，就是这些的话呢，就是在别的地方。
If you wish to make offerings of the stupas, of the statues, you can offer it to elsewhere.
然后各种各样的一直对的话呢。
Because the shrine hall is the place where we study together. This is more of a teaching hall and learning hall. So we shouldn't have too many of those statues cluttered at a small area. We need to protect the space. That is why we made these kinds of regulations, and I hope all of you can cooperate with that. And we have restrictions of the places because of the limitation of the space. we had said, I think it's better to make these kinds of announcements beforehand, before you make those offerings. Otherwise, if you were to already bring those statues, and if we were to say that to you, and then it's probably not the best. Now, regarding to the recitation and practice of Vajrasattva, I think it's better for you not to run around and go to different places, just simply engaging in solitary practice. This is really the best way to protect yourself. Other than that, I don't have other things to say. I am exerting all of my effort to protect the Sangha. And then there are people who may say that, well, he's just here to protect us. To have him or not is not necessary. But maybe things are not as easy as you think. It is not that if you have someone to protect you, you don't have to exert effort yourself. As I said yesterday, it's necessary to have a sense of not too tight nor too loose. The hotel over here is also open to service. Because we're not under lockdown like Shanghai and Beijing, we should also resume to have our normal life. Places like ours sometimes is marked as a high risk level or low or medium risk level. But I'm sure the monastics are not afraid of death compared especially to people living in large cities. I'm just joking, but you should care for your own health. You should wear masks, and you should take care of yourself, and you should care about your own hygiene and care about disinfecting the public places. Also, whenever you enter into an enclosed area, I think it is necessary for the management team to enforce the health code, the health QR code, and so on. There are people who would say that, well, it's too strict in Larunga. On one hand, it's correct compared to the lamas and jomos. But on the other, because we know that our guests come from different places, and we have to also protect ourselves as well. This is something I would like to clarify. Again, I don't have class tomorrow, which is Sunday, and day after is the Dharma Assembly, the recitation of the practice, so there's no class tomorrow, day after tomorrow either. I have been giving teachings. I've been giving teachings for 6 days a week this year because I felt a sense of urgency. And I'm very grateful to all of you who actually attend the class, because if you don't come to attend my class, I won't be able to teach. But of course, I'm giving you classes for free, so that's why I show up too. After our collective practice on the confession liturgy, after we complete that group practice, then maybe we will have 1 day off or so, but we will see according to the situation. Let us now engage in the practice of confession liturgy first. In
mainland China, usually there's a tradition of a 7-day meditation retreat. So this is also our version of the 7-day retreat. It's a 7-day retreat of chanting Vajrasattva to repent wholeheartedly, to make such confession, so that
all of our negative deeds can be purified. I think we're still quite fortunate because before our death, we still have this opportunity to make confession. We practice with so many Sangha members, with so many monastics, and I'm sure there are the noble ones among us as well. If we can chant the, for example, aspiration of Samadhabhadra, that would be supreme causes and conditions that some people would have to accumulate for hundreds of lifetimes. So we should practice with this cherishing mind and practice with joyfulness. Now in Larungar, since we don't have class, if you were to hide at your home and simply sleep for 7 days or watch all kinds of short videos, surfing online, so on and so forth, this is not very graceful, especially since you stay in this supreme sacred site of Buddhism. If you do not practice the Dharma, then it would be the best for you not to wear this sacred robe. Because when we talk about the monastic, we are talking about the one who renounced not just in terms of their appearance, but generated a true renunciation. That is the value that we need to have to seek for true liberation. Now, we are going to begin our class on the Surangama Sutra. Today we're going to finish the 6 entrances. 6 entrances meaning the 6 faculties or 6 roots or the 6 organs, sense organs. Previously we've already talked about how you should know that the eye entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. It could apply to the nose, to the ears. Now we've already talked about the eyes, the nose, and the ears. We've already talked about whatever is seen, the seeing, the hearing, and the smelling. In fact, there is no substance to it. And then the next part, we're going to look at the tongue. Ananda, the Buddha said, consider, for example, a person who licks his lips with his tongue. He excessively licking causes fatigue. If the person is sick, there will be a bitter flavor. If a person who is not sick will have a subtle sweet sensation. Sweetness and bitterness demonstrate the tongue sense of taste. Whenever we rely on the tongue faculty, we taste. In terms of taste, according to the Gateway to Knowledge as well as Abhidharma, there are different categories such as bitter, spicy, sour, sweet, and savory and salty. And there are the mixed flavor, there are the pleasant and unpleasant. There are different types of taste. All kinds of tastes. Now the Buddha gives an example first, and then he would analyze it, and then at the end the Buddha would demonstrate the conclusion that everything's empty. The Buddha told Ananda, saying that if a person were to excessively licking his mouth, after a long period of time, after leaking for a long period of time, then the lips will get fatigued, and at that time you will have a special taste.
好像那个宣化上人说呢，就是说是，自己问自己，就是自己亲自己，就是尤其是没有朋友的人，自己拼
I
命亲
think
自己。
Master Xuanhua, the way he explained it
这个好
was
像
that
他那个
one
是
kissing
的话呢，就
oneself.
是舔的意思，就是主要是这个色图就是舔嘛，就是舔自
But
己的。
this
就是
particular
这个嘴
Chinese
唇，就是这
term
个
means licking. And it
好
means
像
that using
自己
the
这样
tongue
舔的
to
时候，我
lick the
共识了一下，还可以
lick the
就是
lips.
就
So
感
I
觉有一
tried
点就是可能
licking
我有因为
during
身体不好
the
吧，就是有点
lunchtime,
苦味儿
and
就是然后
maybe because
其
I
实
don't have
其
good
实如果
health,
有病
so
啊，
I
如果这个
taste a
人呢，
little
就是他身体
bitterness.
不好有病的话呢，那么
Therefore, the
这一
Buddha
过
said
就是
that
就是可能就像我们中医看那个就是
if
病人的时候呢，
the
就是
person is
有
sick,
时候也
there
有这
will
个
be a
各种
bitter
观察方
flavor.
法嘛，就像是这
In
样的，就
the
是咱们
traditional
自己这个
Chinese
色图呢，
medicine,
就
we
是
also
自
talk
己
about
就是
how
舔自己的嘴唇的时
there
候
are
呢，
different
那就
ways
时
of
间稍微长了以
observing
后
the
呢，就是本来
patients,
是色
and
图就这
one
样
of
舔
which
着的时
is
候呢，结果嘴唇呢就是出现
asking
一
about
种
the flavors that
就
the
是反应，
patients
就是一种这个
tastes in their
苦味，
mouth.
就是苦味。如果这个人呢，就是他身体很健康，没有
The
病的
Buddha said
人的
that
话
if
呢，
this
唯
person
有
is sick,
舔
then
自
this
己，唯
person
有就是
will
舔
taste the
啊，
bitter
就是本
flavor.
来
But
就
if a
也没有
person who
烫
is
过，也没有
healthy,
什么
then
这个
the
苦的
person
东西，苦
will
瓜也没有，
have
就是为
a
什么舔
subtle
这个
sweet
苦的
sensation.
舔呢？就是实际上
But
这
there
是一
is
种这
nothing
个
there.
特殊的一种因缘的这个发生啊。
The person is
那
not
么
eating
这样
anything,
的
so
话呢，
how
就是
could
有
there be
天与
bitterness
苦、
or
咸慈
sweetness?
色
There's
根，不
some
动之
very
时，但
special
心常
causes and
在。
conditions that
就是
is
刚才这个甜和苦
taking
啊，就是
effect.
如果这个就出现的
When
话
the
呢，就是
organ
如
is
果你的这
inactive,
个
a
色
sense of
根呢，就
tastelessness
就刚才这
prevail.
个呢，这个呢，就是因为刚才
So
这个
whatever
甜
it
和
is,
苦的
let it
话
be
呢，就是
bitterness or
主要是这个
sweetness,
现象，就是这个你的色根就是动摇，就是这样的这个原因。
it
不动
appears
之时，如果
mainly
你的色
because
根呢不
the
动之时
organ
呢，
is active.
淡心
But
常在，
when the
有一种
organ is
淡淡的，
inactive,
就是也实际上是也
a
没有
sense
甜，
of
也没有苦，也没有咸
tastelessness
什么其他的
prevails,
这个味
a
道，
sense
这
of
个
a
也是
very,
就
very
你色图
subtle
什么都不
taste.
动的话，那就像我们现在的这平常的嘴唇一样的，就是里面就是没有什么这个味道，
There's
它就
not
没有
much
什
of
么
a
感觉，
taste.
就是这是所以呢，就是上面呢
Tastelessness.
就是有甜和苦
Just
的
like
话，就是
whenever
淡
you
样。凡是
lick
这些的
your
话呢，就
lip
是
right
通
now,
过这
you
个
don't
造
taste
作，就是
anything.
然后呢，就是出现一种倒色素，就是尤其是
However,
前面
if
的
you
甜
keep
这个
fatiguing
苦
your
和淡
tongue,
的话呢，
then
就
there
是
is the
应该是这是
false
一种
conviction
幻
that
觉
would
啊，
appear.
这是一种幻觉，
A
并不
sense
是
of
真正的
illusion.
这个实际当中是存在的。
It is not
然后呢，
existent
就是说
in
这个见
reality.
色于老啊，就是见色于老的话呢，就是我们这个
However,
平
both
时的
the
这个色
tongue
图呢，
and
就是它平常
the
到的就是一
fatigue
些也是
originate
这
in
个酸
body.
甜苦辣的，就是这种这个味道，就是这
The
种这
tongue,
个这种希
both
望
the
相
tongue
的话
and
呢，
the
同
fatigue.
时菩提灯法老想
The
那
tongue
这个呢
usually
就是
could
非常
taste
相
all
同
kinds
的
of
菩提
flavor,
自信当中这个
which is the
引
true
发出来的
commission,
也
and then
好，
the
或
false
者说是
commission, which
以
is
菩
the
提
the
自信的
fatigue
这种这个
that
妙用
caused
的这
the
种
subtle
这个
bitterness
灯
or
法老
sweetness
想呢，就是
that
非
was
常的
described
相同
earlier.
的，
But
也
they
就是说
both
是本
originate
身当中呢是没
in
有的，
the
但是呢
body.
就是以菩
This
提
is
妙
very
用的
similar
就是
to
这种这
the
个就是虚
fatigue
幻
of
的
the
相
eye
呢，
and
就是
the
也
previous
完全
examples
相
as
同的。意
well.
思就是说呢，
And
就
then
是
over
在本
here
性
it
当
says
中
that
是根
they
本就是
both originate
没有
in
这个
body.
成名的啊，
There
就是
is
我们如
really
果这样
no
色图来填
substance
的话呢，就
to
是如果
such
不是
kinds
很
of
方便的话，你可以就是自己
flavor.
就是吃一个汤啊，或者吃这个
Whenever
特
we
别
use our
苦的
tongue
那个
to
味道啊，
lick,
或
for
者是吃
example,
什么
licking
吃
a
这个
candy
臭
or
豆腐
something
啊，还有就是他
bitter,
们这
like
个
a
南方
bitter
那边
melon
叫
or
臭甘蔗，
the
就是甘蔗啊，
something
就
rather
是像这个
stringent,
还有呢就是凡是有各种这
such
个
as
这样
stinky
的看起来
tofu
的
and
色
so
就
on
是
and
还
so
不错的，
forth.
但是实际上呢，
Sometimes that they
真
look
的
really
就
good,
我
but
们
then
那个
when
在那个
you
成都有
taste
些
it,
地
they
方的话呢，
taste a
有
bit
些年轻人特别喜欢就是
it
吃的
has
那
a
些东
sense
西
of
啊，就是什么这个传传那
stench
个
to
传
it.
传，但真的是到旁边
In
去，就我
Chengdu, if
我
you
这
know
个有一
the
次经
Sichuan
常看到有一些
cuisine,
年轻人
lots of
特
the
别
young
多的
people
就是
really likes to
就是
eat
就
those
每年都是一直
kebab
排队的，
like
就是他每天都是这样的这样的。然后我有时候
skewers.
去排队，就是但是要接近到那里，就是
There was this one
one side, I saw a long line of young people trying to line up to get into this particular restaurant and buy things over there. So I lined up there. I lined up over there as well. I pretended to be one of them, and then I lined up. But when I got closer to the food vendor, I really couldn't take that smell. It smells really terrible to me. But it seems that the university students, though those young
those young people really enjoy this particular flavor. The sentient beings in the desire realm really attach to the flavors. But today we will be able to understand that these kinds of tastes, let it be false or true convention, they are simply illusion and they are all empty. Let's look at the next verse where it says that because the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness as well as tastelessness stimulate a recognition of taste, which in turn draws in these defiling sensations, it becomes what is known as a sense of taste. Now let it be bitter and sweet. They are the tastes, we can call them as apparent or very obvious taste. And then the other one, which is tastelessness, is the not obvious taste. This is similar to the previously said brightness and darkness. And these two are the defiling objects. So bitterness and sweetness, those are considered as one defiling object, and the other one, the tastelessness, is as another defiling object. And now let us make the observation, where does it come from? Over here, to use the word recognition. Sometimes we use knowing, recognition, or seeing, and there are different words. 觉知就是知的话，下面的这个意识也比较好一点，但是实际上呢，就是质问，就是主要是它那个味啊，就是味儿，就是它这个呢，就是 mainly this recognition points to knowing the taste. This is really important. 天苦啊，就是天苦即但二乘毕竟 Apart from the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness, and apart from the tastelessness, the sense of taste is originally without a substance. Let it be bitter or sweet. In fact, they are apart from the substance that is called sweet or bitter or tastelessness. Previously, we mentioned that in some of the empowerments of Vajrayana, there are the substance of good tasting objects to be offered, and sometimes not good tasting ones. Some of the melodious sound sometimes is played, and sometimes the very terrible sound, very rough sound. And some of the very fragrant and some of the stench smell is sometimes presented too. But again, what one considers as fragrant may be considered as astringent as or stench to the other. In terms of tastes, some people may like sweet, some may like bitter, and some may like spicy. It is said that if you really like very strongly seasoned food, it is not healthy. If you really like the very salty, very spicy, very sweet, those are not healthy. Because the body has to take lots of effort to digest those flavors. And slowly, this is not very good for your health. Therefore, when we look at people around different places, some prefer certain tastes more than the others. I noticed that in Tibet, we really like salty food. Let it be the tsampa soup or whatever food there is. We put lots of salt. If there's not lots of salt, we feel like it is not very tasty. But slowly, we're getting more used to eat something that's less salty. The meal that's cooked in the Chinese temples in the Chinese mainland, I think their food are very healthy. But people with habitual tendency to enjoy very heavy flavored food may not be able to enjoy those. But this is really a habit that we can train so that we can be healthier. In fact, let it be whatever flavor you like. The substance of it doesn't exist at all. There is no substance to the flavor. The Buddha said that thus, Ananda, you should know that the perception of sweetness, bitterness, and tastelessness do not come from sweetness or bitterness, or does it exist because of tastelessness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. So this is exactly the same way, following the previous logic. You need to observe the object, the subject, which is our faculty, and then the emptiness. According to the Vajrayana teaching, though that sometimes we do observe in such a way, but usually in the Vajrayana teaching we understand this through a direct pointing out. But the Surangama uses a different way to point out the nature of the six faculties. Previously, we talked about the five skandhas, the five aggregates, and over here it talks about the emptiness of the six roots. In the Vajrayana, it talks about how the five aggregates are the five Buddhas, the five roots are also the five bodhisattvas. Now, the next part, the Buddha talks about how the so-called bitterness, sweetness, and the tastelessness, in fact, it does not come from the object. For what reason, the Buddha said, if it came from sweetness and bitterness, it would cease to exist when tastelessness were experienced. So how could it recognize tastelessness? And if it arose from tastelessness, it would vanish when flavor of sweetness was tasted. So how could it receive the two flavors, sweet and bitter? People would think that, well, there must be a flavor. When I taste the bitter melon, there is bitter, and when I eat candy, there is sweet. It definitely comes from the object. That taste, it does come from the object. However, that is just our grasping towards the true existence of the object. We grasp onto the substance or something that has a solid existent character that's attached to the object. In fact, if it were to be truly existent, then the character shouldn't switch from one place to another. We only hold on to these kinds of flavors as objectively existent and not thinking that they are false. They are the results of causes and conditions because we hold on to them. Just like whenever we see a person in a TV or a rainbow, in fact, those are just manifestations, those are illusions. It occasionally would manifest, but then it would disappear. Therefore, the holding on to the bitter melon is bitter and the sweet candy is sweet, those are simply our graspings. The second way of observing this is suppose they came from emptiness. The sense of taste would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mouth. If the taste comes from space, then it would be experienced by emptiness, but not our mouth. But whenever we eat things, we actually taste it with our mouth. Suppose, moreover, as it was emptiness itself which tasted, what connection would that have to do with your entrance? Pardon me, I skipped a line. The second way of making observation The second way of making observation is suppose that it came from the tongue, which is obviously devoid of defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness and of tastelessness. these kinds of tastes, if it were to be derived from the subject, which is the tongue, then what's the function of object? You don't need the object of the things to be eaten, to be tasted anymore. Then we would be able to know that in an essence of tasting such as this would have no self-nature. And then the next one is, suppose it came from emptiness. If it came from emptiness, then the space can taste. Your mouth doesn't need to taste anymore. Furthermore, if the space can taste, then what connection would that have with your interests? Does it have anything to do with your faculty? It would no longer have any connection with your faculty anymore. Therefore, you should know that the tongue entrance is empty and false. Empty and false in the Tibetan translation, it is the false convention or convention, since it neither depends upon causes and condition for existence, nor is it spontaneous in nature. This is also really important. According to Master Oyu's commentary, he talked about a bhikshu whose name is Gavapati. This noble one, when he listened to the teaching of the nature of the tongue and he attained enlightenment. The later part of this teaching brought enlightenment to many of the noble ones in the past. When it comes to the tongue, I think we need to truly look at ourselves and apply it in our life. Sometimes when it comes to the Surangama Sutra, I try my best to explain it in terms of the literal meaning. Especially sometimes I feel that I have gained some understanding of the five treatises and I've gained some understanding of the Tantrayana teachings, therefore I think I give okay teachings. But sometimes maybe my teaching is not that great. But I think in terms of my point is that in terms of the literary meaning, it's easy to be expounded by you or by me. But what's really important is that if we can apply it in our real life, when it comes to the faculty of the tongue, can you look at your own experience when you taste something bitter, sour, and sweet, and so on and so forth? Would you be able to remember that it is? Would you be able to remember to make the analysis whether it arises from the object or from the faculty or from the emptiness? If you were able to make this analysis following the train of thought and analysis given by the Buddha, then enlightenment is just a matter of time. Because look at us, we have this karma that we need to eat every day, and we have this desire to eat. Look at everyone in this world, we all eat. Look at Shanghai and Beijing. They've been in a lockdown for a few months now. At the time of being out of the lockdown, the people over there spend a long time going to restaurants and kept on eating. Of course, I understand that because the sentient beings, as the beings in desire realm, we need to eat food and drink. But we need to use these experiences, especially that's taught in the Surangama Sutra. We shouldn't just rely on the words, because we can talk about words as much as we want. But when it comes to the mind, when it comes to, for example, the eye faculty, when it comes to the ear and the tongue, when we see beautiful things or ugly, or whenever we hear different sounds, whenever we smell, and then whenever we taste things, would we be able to apply those teachings in those experiences, we constantly think that we do have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. But according to the Heart Sutra, it says there is no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body. Why is that? Can you make that observation and come to the realization that's stated in the Heart Sutra? In fact, this is why the sentient beings are confused. We constantly think that the convention, the true convention and false convention are truly existent. But once we make this analysis, we definitely see how pitiful the sentient beings are, being confused by all of those. Now, the next one is the Buddha said, Ananda, consider, for example, a person who touches his warm hand with his cold hand. If the cold is in excess to the warmth, the warm hand will then become cold. If the warmth is in excess to the cold, his cold hand will become warm. Maybe the situation is that it's in the winter, so his one hand is in the cold, but the other one is close to a fireplace. And then if the two hands were to hold each other, then the cold and warm hands would slowly get into the state of equilibrium. Just as is stated in the Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, it says that if we were to pour boiling water on top of ice, if the ice is bigger, then the water will slowly become ice. If we were to pour a greater amount of hot water on a much smaller piece of ice, then the ice would become water. And then the Buddha said that if the cold is in excess of the warmth, then the warm hand will become cold. And if warmth is in excess of the cold, his cold hand will become warm. So the sensation of warmth and cold is felt through the contact and the separation of the two hands. It means that the sensation of touch at the time of parting becomes more obvious. The reason behind it is that while your hands are touching each other, if one particular hand has an excessive coldness or warmth, then such sensation would become more obvious at time of parting. This particular sensation is also out of fatigue. In Abhidharma, it says that there are the causes, the place of cause, which means the four elements, and then the fruition of touch, such as the smoothness and roughness and different textures. Also, there are the lightness, heaviness, and there are the hunger, thirst, and coldness. When it comes to touch, the form, sound, smell, touch, and touch, that's one of the objects. But this particular touch is different than the form that we see through our eyes or the sound that we hear through our ears. Rather, it is more insubstantial than the others. Those of you who study Abhidharma, you should be very clear about that. Now, we've already talked about how these two, the coldness and the warmth, would balance itself through touching. Let it be cold and warmth, or let it be the sensation of hunger or sensation of heaviness, a sensation of whatever. Those kinds of sensations are also out of illusion. Whatever kinds of objects that's out there, whatever kinds of effect and different kinds of activities qualities in the object. Those are no other than the effect of causes and conditions, because it is no other than illusion. It is a character of illusion. Let it be the false convention or the true convention. All of these characteristics, the illusory characteristics, both the body and fatigue originate in Bodhi. They both originate in the nature of Bodhi, rather they're the manifestation of the Bodhi, the illusory manifestation. They're not intrinsically existent. Why are they not intrinsically existent? Their protraction produces the characteristic of fatigue, because a physical sensation is stimulated in the midst of the two defiling objects of separation and union. Defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the awareness of sensation. Whenever we have the sensation of union and separation, in fact, they are simply the two types of illusory dust.
两种王乘的话呢，实际上是这个发觉啊，就是因为这个身体的话
And this is the awareness of sensation. It is associated with the faculty of body.
当中呢，就是就出现什么呢？就是它系这样的这个外面的这个触的。
And after it's manifested, it will
这个金尘啊，就是外境的尘。这样的话呢，就是这个叫做
take in the appearance.
因为身体呢，就是知道是轻的。
Because the body has the awareness that knows the lightness or heaviness. Whenever we talk about the different kinds of sensations, for example, seeing, hearing, and awareness, the seeing is associated to eyes, and hearing is to the ear, and the smelling is to the nose, and then there's the sensation. In the Tibetan language, there is a direct word that is easy to read, but in the Chinese language, to recite the different types of sensations, it's a little bit difficult to say.
它没有一个特别知道是知道，就是这个身体的这种知觉吧，就是身体接触的这个知觉，但实际上它是一种。
Is there a particular terminology?
没有一个专用词啊，有的话
couldn't find it. It would be better to have that. This awareness. In Chinese, it is awareness, but it would be better to have a particular word that's associated to the body. If we were to say seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, awareness and recognition, that might be easier. That might be more clear. Since there is the faculty of body, then there is the touch, and there is the awareness of heaviness or lightness or heat and hunger and so on. This kind of awareness. In the sutra it says, apart from the two sets of defiling objects of separation and union and pleasures and the pleasantness and unpleasantness, the awareness of sensation is originally without a substance. This kind of awareness, there are the different kinds of sensations that's attached to it, such as the softness, gentleness, and roughness. In the past, whenever there's the empowerment, we would be presented with objects such as the very rough yak fur made of tent. And when you touch it, it's very rough. It's very difficult to touch it. And there are the other ones, that's such as brocade and katak, and very silky and soft. That's very pleasant to touch. Whenever you touch it, it's almost like the clothing of the celestial beings, the really, really good ones. And then over here it says that let it be of separation and union, or with pleasantness and unpleasantness,
有些的话呢，就是他离开的时候呢，就是为，就是合的时候呢，顺就是快乐。
There are different ways of explaining the separation and union. The separation and union can be
那不管怎么样，下面好像
can be combined with the unpleasantness and union with pleasantness. It could also be favorable and unfavorable in this way of explanation. In the Tibetan translation, it's translated as the ones that creates harm and creates benefits. And now let's look at the next verse. It says, "Thus, Ananda, you should know that this sensation does not come from separation and union, nor does it exist because of pleasantness and unpleasantness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness." Again, the logic is to analyze the object and then analyze the subject and then analyze the emptiness. That, in fact, this sensation does not appear, or it's not a product of any of the three. Whenever we look at the object, the union and the separation of object, sometimes we would feel that there is a sensation that's attached to it. In fact, these are simply the illusion of ours. Is completely groundless. It is without any base, without any source. It is not from the object. It is not from the faculty. It is not derived from the emptiness. There is no source of such a sensation. But you simply feel that it is true. Therefore, it is a false sensation. It is a false grasping towards that kind of sensation as truly existent. For those of you who have sharp faculty or sharp capacity, you would be able to understand it now. According to Abhidharma, it says that there are the two types of sensation, one from the body and the other one from consciousness. Though that the sensation that we feel from the physical body needs to have the cooperation, so to speak, from the consciousness, but the body itself still has the sensation that is percepted through the faculty of body. We can make such an observation. Our body constantly feels pleasant or unpleasant throughout the day, and we would seek for experience of pleasant. Not just human beings, those birds, those little magpies and crows, when they're happy, they would also try to clean their fur, and they have their particular actions. And then whenever it is in the unfavorable conditions, that would create unfavorable sensations such as rain or hail, and then they would try their best to hide in their body too. So we can see that the mundane beings simply are so deluded by our illusion. When we truly make the observation, the body itself, the body's sensation itself, the awareness itself doesn't have any birthplace. There is no place for it to be derived. The Buddha over here gives us the instruction to Ananda first, and then to the sentient beings who kept on asking the questions such as the 6 entrances and the 5 aggregates. I think Ananda must be the manifested Shravaka, because he wouldn't have any of those true graspings, but the sentient beings do. Therefore, he asks the questions in such a way so that we can be benefited through the teachings of the Buddha. The sentient beings' capacities are so different. The Buddha gives us so many different teachings, and we should see which particular teaching is very fitting to us. And then the next observation follows the same logic. For what reason, the Buddha says, if it arose when there was union, it would disappear when there was separation. So how could it sense the separation? Now, if the body's sensation, when it arises from union, then separateness would be forever disappeared. In this way, how would one know that there is a separation? If the two hands were to touch, which is in union, and then part, at that time, one would not be able to know it. And then the Buddha said the two characteristics of pleasantness and unpleasantness are the same way. So if one were to feel pleasantness, then there would be no unpleasantness at all. If there's pleasantness of the object, then there would be no unpleasant character that's attached to object, or vice versa. Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of the four characteristics of union, separation, pleasantness, and unpleasantness, then awareness of physical sensations such as this would have no self-nature. In this way, Ananda, you should know that the body sensation, the physical sensation such as this, in fact, doesn't have any self-nature. This is the observation made from the object and subject. Suppose it came from emptiness. The awareness of sensation would be experienced by emptiness itself. What connection would that have with your entrance? If you were to feel all kinds of sensations, if you were to think that all kinds of sensations are in fact came from emptiness, then what does that have to do with you? Because if the emptiness would feel all the different sensations such as cold, hot, light, heavy, and all of those, then those sensations would be all pervasive in emptiness, since emptiness and space is all pervasive. Therefore, what does it have to do with you? Therefore, you should know that the body entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Now the next one, let's look at the faculty of intellect, which is a little bit difficult, a little bit more so than the previous 5. So you need to pay attention. Do not doze off. Pay close attention and investigate into your own wisdom, because it's a bit difficult for me. Now that I'm aging, I feel that I'm getting less intellectual. And whenever I read the classical Chinese, it is a bit difficult for me too, though that in my middle school I attended some classes for the classical Chinese, but it doesn't really help much. But I'm sure you would be okay since you've read so many books and you've studied a lot. For me, since I barely attended much of the middle school, it is a bit difficult for me to understand it, but maybe for you it should be fine. Sometimes I think to myself that I really wish that I would have read more and studied more when I was younger. I wish I had more opportunity. I heard the same aspiration from another young man from Tibet. He said that when he went to the cities, he really wished that his parents would have forced them to study more. Though that my parents didn't cause my situation, it was really the time, but still, I wish I studied more. I wish I had more of such opportunity. The Buddha then said, Ananda, consider, for example, a person who becomes so fatigued that he goes to sleep. Now we're going to talk about consciousness or intellect that is used in this translation. It says that this person felt really tired from work, from studying, from whatever kinds of chores that they need to do, and then he needs to do, and this person goes to sleep. Having slept soundly, he awakens and tries to recollect what he experienced while asleep. After feeling really tired, this person fell asleep.
累了就睡，就是然后睡了就醒了，是吧？就是醒了。
After
然后醒了以后呢，
he
就是他
then
就难成，
awakens
他可能
and
一方面
tries
是回忆
to
自己的这种
recollect what
事
he
情也可以，或者
experienced
是
and
他看
tries
那些
to
外尘，就是看那个
remember
色
what
色
he
香味的，就是
dreamt.
或者是他就去外境了，
Whatever
就
kinds
这样。
of
然后呢，
dreams
就是
that
他
he
就可
had,
以
maybe
这
about
个
sound, about
就产
form,
生分
about
别呢，就
touch.
是会意啊，就是就这样，就是
That
累
kind
了
of
就睡了，就睡了
dualistic
就醒了，就
experience that he
醒了
had
就
in
开
the
始上
dream.
班，就是
He
上班
then
以后呢，
recalls
就是
some
他有
things
就
and
是各种
forgot
各样的这种
some others.
这个什么前世
After
晚上就是就
he
各种这个分别
had
念，
the dream,
然后分别念有了以后呢，就是
he
然
had
后
those
事以未
experiences,
忘，
he had
最
those
后
dualistic
回忆完了以
thoughts,
后呢又忘了，
and
就
he
是
had
就
those
反正就是
recollection,
这个睡了以
and
后
then
呢
he
就是醒
forgot
了，
about
醒了以
some
后
of
呢就
them.
是就想了，想了以后呢又忘了。
So there are
这是
the
也是可
four
能跟我们也差不多
stages:
吧，
the
就是很多
dream,
人的就包
awaken,
括我们背诵的话呢，
recollection,
就是不
and
想的累了就
and
睡了，就
forget.
睡了就醒过来了，以后然后就开始记，
Maybe
就是
you can
记以
relate to
后的话
that
呢就
too.
过一会儿呢
Sometimes
又忘了，
you
然
would
后
be able
又
to
伤心了，就是伤心以后过一会
remember
儿吃得
and
好，一
memorize
点
some
开
of the
心了，就
verses,
是
and sometimes
反
you
正这个
don't,
人
and
生就是
sometimes
这样的，
you would
对
feel
吧？就是
upset
就
that you
自己对
forget
自己
them,
很
and
失望
sometimes
的，
you would feel
尤其
happy
是
that
旁
you
边的
remember
道友
those
呢，就是背
verses.
得很好的，是很
So
记
there's
住的，
this kind
别人
of
都念3
change
遍的
and
话呢，就记得清清楚
process.
楚的，然后我念100遍的话，那还是模模糊糊的。
I know that there are
为什
people
么
who are
是
very
这
good
样？
at
就是然后自己对自
memorizing or
己就
taking
是
those
产生
words
那
to
个
heart,
就是
and
这种
they
失
can
望啊，就
memorize
是失望。
verses
然后
after
就刚才
reading
这
for
知道
3
吧，就是
times,
每一个
and
都有一个过
there
程，
are
睡
others
的
who
过程，
can't
醒的过程，
remember
还
at
有这
all.
个会议的过程，还
Anyhow,
有这
this
个遗
particular
忘的过程
person
啊，就是4
goes
个过
through
程。
the 4
时机颠倒
stages:
啊，
the
时机
sleep,
颠倒，生住
awaken,
意灭，习
and
记，细
recollect
终归，
and forget.
不相郁郁成一根枝。就是现
Thus,
在什么
he's
叫做一根枝的话呢？ 就刚才这
upside
4
down
个
as
过
it
程啊，
goes
就
through
是睡、
production,
醒、
dwelling,
忆、
change,
忘，
and
就是这4个过
extinction,
程的话呢，
which
实
are
际上是
taking
这些
in
这
and
个
returned
4个
to
过
a
程呢，就是
center
都是这个
habitually.
颠倒的，就是怎么颠倒的话呢？他们每一个的话呢，就是都有生住灭
Each of
啊，就
them,
是生住灭。那么这些生住灭
each
的
of
话呢，
those
就是都
stages
是在我们的这个一根当
also
中呢，就是可以
follows the
串习啊，就
production,
可以呢，
dwelling,
就是
change, and
就接连不
extinction,
断
and
的
each
就是
of
去
them
这个意识当中接了以
continuously
后呢，就是
to
又回归于这
habituate
个
to
意
this
识，
person.
然后这个不相逾越，
And
不相
then
逾越的话呢，就是
each
它不会
following
那
the
个
next with
就是
without
就是
ever
怎么
being
叫超越的，
overtaken.
就是它是前产生后，就是它是一
The
种相
previous
续不
one
断的，就是
would
那么这个叫做是一
produce
个
the next
啊，就
one.
这个叫做一个。
This is
为
called
什么
the
呢？就是刚才
faculty
我说
of
这些
intellect, or
颠倒的
faculty
话
of
呢，比如
consciousness,
说
mind
就刚才
consciousness.
睡的话呢，就是它有生住意灭3个啊，就睡的话呢，刚开始要想睡，然后正在睡
That
的
is
话
to
呢，就
say
是
that
安住。
when it comes
最后
to
呢，
the
就是
first
睡
stage,
完了
which
以
is
后，可能
sleep,
就是
it
你
has
的那
the
种这个
production
睡
of
眠呢，
sleep,
就是慢
dwelling
慢
of
慢
sleep,
就是
change of sleep, and
就
extinction of
是
sleep.
就
To
开始
further
接近就
demonstrate
是
what it
醒
means
醒
is
过来
that
了嘛，
when
就这
you
个叫做是
fall
变
asleep,
异，
at
就
that
是它
time
那
it
个
is a
一
production
种
of
变
sleep
化，
when you
就
get
然后呢，
drowsy and
就开始
started
这
to
个睡眠就已经
feel
没有了。然后
sleepy
醒
and
也
then
是
fall
这样的，
asleep.
醒的
That's
话
the
呢，刚开始
production.
才
And
是
then
醒过来，
dwelling is
醒
when
过来
you
了以后呢，
keep
安住在
sleeping.
新的
That
这
is
种
dwelling.
状
And
态
then
当
when
中。
you
然后醒了以后的话呢，
start
当然会可
to
能又想睡
get
的
a
话呢，
little
那就
bit
慢慢就变异。最后呢，就
awake,
是
and
又
then
睡
that
下
is
去的话呢，
change
那个
of sleep.
醒觉呢已经
And
灭了，
then
就是
when
就
you
是灭了。
wake up,
那同
that
样
is
的，
the
就是刚
extinction
才
of
想
sleep.
忆
But
回
when
忆的
you
话呢，也
fall
是有
back
生
to
住意
sleep,
灭。
that is the
还有那个
extinct of
就是
awake,
这
and then
个忘的话呢，也
change
是
to
忘有
sleep
生住
again.
意灭啊，就
So
是就每一个都有这
each
个4
of
个过
them,
程，就像
each
我们
of
这
the
个
stages
戒的
have
话呢，
the
就是有
4
成住坏空
steps
啊，就是
or the
成
4
住，然后
stages.
这个然后坏
There's
就是正在
the
这个趋向
production,
灭亡的
dwelling,
这个过
change,
程啊，
and
就是
extinction
真理
in
是
sleep.
叫做意，
They're
就是一般这
also
个坏就是坏，
associated
然后
to
最后呢
awake
就是
and
空，它这样的一
recollection
个过
and
程。
forget.
那这些
It
过程
is
的话呢，就
similar
是其实在那
to
个
when we
意
talk
识当
about
中
the
的话呢，
4
就是都
stages
可以
of
这个它很多
any
很多的这
phenomena.
种
It
这个
is
现
the
象，就是
formation,
事情的话呢，
duration,
就出现
sensation and empty. After taking the course of these 4 stages, it will then go back to consciousness. It simply manifests out of the habitual tendency. And it is constant, continuous. It is not like the eye faculty, that is, whenever we look, we can look, glance at once and then that's it. But consciousness, in fact, it has something that could be remained.
that could be reminisced after. For example, after you finish dreaming, you can then wake up. After waking up, you can then recollect. After recollect, you can forget. After forget, you can go back to sleep again. So in our consciousness, it constantly rotates in such a way. Therefore, it is called the root of consciousness, the root of intellect. In the Abhidharma, it says that after the five consciousness, after it ceases the form, sound, smell, taste, and touch, after they ceased, then the consciousness, the root of consciousness would manifest. If it is not extinct, if it is not extinct, then the faculty of consciousness, the faculty of intellect will not manifest. At time of sleeping, the five root consciousness, according to Abhidharma, it is called the form consciousness, because they all have form. But the mental consciousness, the root of intellect, doesn't have any form. Therefore, it is completely part of the mind stream. Whenever we talk about dream, sleep, recollect, and forget, the four stages both have the production, dwelling, change, and extinction. Which propels the consciousness to constantly rotate in the four stages. This is known as the mind organ or intellect. The mind and fatigue are both bodhi. Persistence produces the characteristic of fatigue. This particular logic is exactly the same as the previous one, that let it be the true or the false manifestation, there is still the manifestation of the bodhi. The two defiling objects of production and extinction stimulates a sense of knowing, which in turn grasps this inner sense data, reversing the flow of seeing and hearing. Before the flow reaches the ground, it is known as the faculty of intellect. Let it be the production or extinction, the whole process of mind consciousness, the production, the dwelling, the change and extinction, now are categorized as production and cessation.
外面的这个是往外，就是往外，就是无根的话，那就是往外，就是我们就是移民里面讲的是有个什么就是什么四个玻璃窗的里面的
faculties that we talked about earlier
外面就是五个门当中就是看
are
所以
the
说这个呢就是
faculties that focus on the outside. In the Buddhist logic, we talk about the five faculties are just like the five glass windows, and mind consciousness is inside this room that has five glass windows. So the mind consciousness would then grasp on the inner sense data or the inner dust, but the other five root faculties would focus on the five outer defiling objects or defiling dust.
见闻六就是见闻逆流六不及地，就是那这样的意识的这种状态是什么样呢？就是其实见和闻这些的话呢，
state of consciousness is
五个根的话呢，就是往外流。
The five root, the five roots, the five faculties flows outside.
现现的。 而这里的这个降温的话呢，在意识状态的话呢，不是往外流，就是往内流。
But at the state of mind consciousness, it then reverses the flow, start to flow inside.
就是六不及地的话呢，意思是它呢就是
Before the flow reaches the ground, it is known as the faculty of intellect.
往内的话呢，在意识当中的话呢，
When it flows inside,
真正的这个触及的。为什么呢？因为一根的话呢，
it doesn't truly touch touch the ground of the faculty of intellect. Why is that? Because the root of the faculty of intellect, it is a continuum. And within this continuum, it only captures the images of form, sound, touch, fragrance, and taste. Other than those images of it, other than those illusory images of it, there is no true form that can be perceived. The 5 faculties, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, these 5 form roots can gather the outer forms or gather all the things that they can perceive from the outside, and then they'll come back to the one that resides in the middle of the room. Or to give you an example, we send out 5 people to gather mushrooms so that they will come back with the mushroom and hand it to the cook, and then the cook will be able to make a dish. So the cook is the consciousness. It has never really went outside, but it simply stays on alaya and captures those sensory data, those illusions, those images. Do you understand it by now? Many different teachers have various ways of explaining it. Some of the teachers explained it this way, and I think it's easier to understand. If you understand what the mind consciousness or the faculty of the intellect is, then you should be clear about it. Apart from the 2 sets of defiling objects of waking and sleeping and of production and extinction, the faculty of intellect is originally without substance. Now, without the defiling object of waking and sleeping and the defiling dust of production and extinction, you would realize the faculty of intellect is originally without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that the faculty of intellect does not come from waking, sleeping, production, or extinction, nor does it arise from sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. So the Buddha over here says that if you were to say that it comes from sleeping, then how would you know that there is a waking? And if you were to say that it comes from waking, then how would you know that there is something that is sleeping? Maybe the Buddha here got a little tired, so he didn't really give the example of production and extinction. The Buddha then expounded it more briefly, just like my class as well. I am briefly explaining it as well. The Buddha over here simply just gives one example and use the same logic. You can apply it to the production, the extinction, and the change, and so on. So you can apply to all the other aspects. But later, the Buddha did talk about a rise, talk about the production. So the Buddha said that if it came from production, it would cease to exist at the time of extinction. So how could it undergo extinction? If you were to say that it comes from production, then there would be no extinction, right? Therefore, how could someone know that there is non-extinction? This is again from the observation of object. If it were to be produced from the root, the subject that grasps onto the object, this part is a little bit difficult. So it says that it's supposed that it came from the sense organ. The sense organ we're talking about is from the faculty of intellect. then waking and sleeping cause only a physical opening and closing respectively. We've already talked about how there are the two states, the waking and sleeping. But if you were to say that it came from sense organ, then you're to say that the waking and sleeping would cause a physical change or physical closing and opening. But we all know that sleeping is completely sense. It is completely based on mind. If we don't have a mind, how would we know that if we're awake or if we're asleep? And then he continued to say that if this is not on the object, rather it comes from sense organ, then your physical opening, then the waking and sleeping would be based on the physical opening and closing. Since there is no mind, then it is completely based on the sense organs, the 5 organs. For example, when you're asleep, then all your 5 organs and all your limbs will start to curl up and close up. When you are awake, you would stretch out your limbs and your organs, and then you are awake. But without mind, how would a person fall asleep or not? There would be no concept of it at all. Apart from the 2 movements, the faculty of intellect is as unsubstantial as flowers in space because it is fundamentally without a self-nature. Now, this part is a bit difficult to explain because previously we already explained how if it were to be produced from subject and if it were produced from object, and then apart from the 2, instead of the 2 movements, I think instead of that it should be apart from the object and the subject. It then could be explained as a short summary to the previous 2 because all the previous 5 organs were explained in such a way. But a great numbers of masters explained altogether connected with sense organ. So that would be a bit difficult to explain or a little bit difficult to understand. Then you have to explain that apart from the 2 movements, then the faculty of intellect is unsubstantial as flowers in space, which could be difficult to understand, but you can read into it more and see if that's true. Suppose it came from emptiness, the sense of intellect would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mind. Then what connection would that have with your entrance? This one we have already explained previously as well. Therefore, you should know that the mind entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneously in nature.